going on, that great innovators are really in the process of establishing neural circuitry that is all about reinforcing the me and the process of being me.
Yeah, so this goes to, so this is like extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. Mm-hmm. So the Steve Jobs kind of Zen version of this, right, or the sort of hippie version of this was the journey is the reward, right? And he always told his employees that. It's like, look, everybody thinks in terms of these big public markers like the stock price or the IPO or the product launch or whatever. He's like, no, it's actually the process itself is the point. Right, and if you, to your point, if you have that mentality, then that's an intrinsic motivation, not an extrinsic motivation, and so that's the kind of intrinsic motivation that can keep you going for a long time. Another way to think about it is competing against yourself, right? It's like, can I get better at doing this, right? And can I prove to myself that I can get better? There's also a big social component to this, and this is one of the reasons why Silicon Valley punches so far above its weight as a place. There's a psychological component, which also goes to the comparison set. So a phenomenon that we've observed over time is the leading tech company in any city will aspire to be as large as the previous leading tech company in that city, but often not larger, right? Because they sort of have a model of success, and as long as they beat that level of success, they've kind of checked the box, like they've made it, and then but then in contrast, you're in Silicon Valley and you look around and it's just like Facebook and Cisco and Oracle and Hewlett Packard and
gladiators.
And you're just like looking at these giants, and many of them are still, Mark Zuckerberg's still, going to work every day and like trying to do, and so like these people are like, the role models are like alive, right? They're like right there, right? And it's so clear like how much better they are and how much bigger their accomplishments are. And so what we find is young founders in that environment have much greater aspirations. Right, because they just, again, maybe it's like, maybe at that point, maybe it's the social status, maybe there's an extrinsic component to that, but or maybe it helps calibrate that internal system to basically say, actually, no, the opportunity here is not to build a local, what you may call a local maximum form of success, but let's build to a global maximum form of success, which is something as big as we possibly can. Ultimately, the great ones are probably driven more internally than externally when it comes down to it, and that is where you get this phenomenon where you get people who are extremely successful and extremely wealthy who very easily can punch out and move to Fiji and just call it, and they're still working 16-hour days. Right, and so obviously something explains that has nothing to do with external rewards, and I think it's an internal thing.
As many of you know, I've been taking AG1 daily since 2012, so I'm delighted that they're sponsoring the podcast. AG1 is a vitamin mineral probiotic drink that's designed to meet all of your foundational nutrition needs. Now, of course, I try to get enough servings of vitamins and minerals through whole food sources that include vegetables and fruits every day, but oftentimes I simply can't get enough servings. But with AG1, I'm sure to get enough vitamins and minerals and the probiotics that I need, and it also contains adaptogens to help buffer stress. Simply put, I always feel better when I take AG1. I have more focus and energy, and I sleep better, and it also happens to taste great. For all these reasons, whenever I'm asked, if you could take just one supplement, what would it be? I answer AG1. If you'd like to try AG1, go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to claim a special offer. They'll give you 5 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3K2. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Huberman.
I've heard you talk a lot about the inner landscape, the inner psychology of these folks, and I appreciate that we're going even deeper into that today. And we will talk about the landscape around whether or not Silicon Valley or New York, whether or not there are specific cities that are ideal for certain types of pursuits. I think there was an article written by Paul Graham some years ago about the conversations that you overhear in a city will tell you everything you need to know about whether or not you belong there in terms of your professional pursuits. Some of that's changed over time, and now we should probably add Austin to the mix because it was written some time ago. In any event, I want to return to that, but I want to focus on an aspect of this intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators in terms of something that's a bit more cryptic, which is one's personal relationships. Mm-hmm. If I think about the catalog of innovators in Silicon Valley, some of them, like Steve Jobs, had complicated personal lives, romantic personal lives early on. And then it sounds like he worked it out. I don't know. I wasn't their couples therapist, but he when he died, he was in a marriage that for all the world seemed like a happy marriage. You also have examples of innovators who have had many partners, many children with other partners. Elon comes to mind. I don't think I'm disclosing anything that isn't already obvious. Those could have been happy relationships and just had many of them. But the reason I'm asking this is you can imagine that for the innovator, the person with these traits who's trying to build up this this thing, whatever it is, that having someone or several people in some cases who just truly believe in you when the rest of the world may not believe in you yet or at all could be immensely powerful. And we have examples from cults that embody this. We have examples from politics. We have examples from tech innovation and science. And I've always been fascinated by this because I feel like it's the more cryptic and yet very potent form of allowing someone to build themselves up. It's a combination of inner psychology and extrinsic motivation, because obviously if that person were to die or leave them or cheat on them or pair up with some other innovator, which we've seen several times recently and in the past, it can be devastating to that person. But what are your thoughts on the role of personal and in particular romantic relationship as it relates to people having an idea and they're feeling that they can really bring that idea to fruition in the world?
So it's a real mixed bag. You have lots of examples in all directions, and I think it's something like following. So first is we talked about the personality traits of these people. They tend to be highly disagreeable.
Doesn't foster a good romantic relationship.
Highly disagreeable people can be difficult to be in a relationship.
I may have heard of that once or twice before. A friend may have given me that example.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And maybe you just need to find the right person who complements that and is willing to. There's a lot of relationships where it's always this question about relationships, right? Which is, do you want to have the same personality, growth profile, the same behavioral traits, basically, as your partner? Or do you actually want to have, is it an opposites thing? And, look, I'm sure you've seen this. There are relationships where you'll have somebody who's highly disagreeable who's paired with somebody who's highly agreeable. And it actually works out great. Because one person just gets to be on their soapbox all the time, and the other person's just like, okay, right? And it's fine, right? It's fine. It's good. You put two disagreeable people together, maybe sparks fly, and they have great conversations all the time, and maybe they come to hate each other, right? And so anyway, so these people, if you're going to be with one of these people, you're fishing out of the disagreeable end of the pond. And again, when I say disagreeable, I don't mean, these are normal distributions. I don't mean like 60% disagreeable or 80% disagreeable. The people we're talking about are 99.99% disagreeable, right? So these are ornery people. So part of it's that, and then of course they have the other personality traits, right? They're super conscientious. They're super driven. As a consequence, they tend to work really hard. They tend to not have a lot of time for family vacations or other things. They don't enjoy them if they're forced to go on them. And so again, that kind of thing can fray at a relationship. So there's a fair amount in there that's loaded. Like somebody's going to partner with one of these people needs to be signed up for the ride, and that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to do. Or you need a true partnership of two of these, which is also hard to do. So I think that's part of it. And then look, I think a big part of it is, people achieve a certain level of success, and, either in their own minds or, publicly. And then they start to be able to get away with things, right? And they start to be able to, it's like, well, okay, now we're rich and successful and famous, and now I deserve, and this is where you get into, I view this now in the realm of personal choice, right? You get in this thing where people start to think that they deserve things. And so they start to behave in, very bad ways. And then they blow up their personal worlds as a consequence, and maybe they regret it later, and maybe they don't. Right? It's always a question. So I think there's that. And then I don't know, some people just need. Maybe the other part of it is some people just need more emotional support than others, and I don't know that that's I don't know that tilts either way. Like I know some of these people who have great loving relationships and seem to draw very much on having this kind of firm foundation to rely upon. And then I know other people who are just their personal lives are just a continuous train wreck, and it doesn't seem to matter. Like professionally, they just keep doing what they're doing. And maybe maybe we could talk here about whatever is the personality trait for risk taking, right? Like some people are so incredibly risk prone that they need to take risk in all aspects of their lives at all times. And if part of their life gets stable, they find a way to blow it up. And that's some of these people you could describe in those terms also.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah. Because I think risk-taking and sensation-seeking is something that fascinates me for my own reasons and in my observations of others. Yep. Does it dovetail with these 5 traits in a way that can really serve innovation in ways that can benefit everybody? The reason I say to benefit everybody is because there is a view of how we're painting this picture of the innovator as this really cruel person. But oftentimes what we're talking about are innovations that make the world far better for billions of people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And by the way, everything we're talking about also is not just in tech or science or in business. It's also everything we're also talking about is true for the arts, right? So, the history of artistic expression is, you have people with all these same kinds of traits.
Right. Well, I was thinking about Picasso and his regular turnover of lovers and partners, and he was very open about the fact that it was one of the sources of his productivity / creativity. He wasn't shy about that. I suppose if he were alive today, it might be a little bit different. He might be judged a little differently.
Right. Or that was his story for, behaving in a pattern that, was very awful for the people around him and he didn't care. Right.
Right. Maybe they left him.
Yeah. Exactly. Who knows. Right. So, there's puts and takes to all this. But no. Okay. So I have a theory. So here's a theory. This is one of these. I keep a list of things that'll get me kicked out of a dinner party. And topics at any given point in time.
Do you read it before you go in?
Yeah. So I have it on auto recall so that I can get out of these things. But so here's the thing that get me kicked out of a dinner party, especially these days. So think of the kind of person where it's like very clear that they're like super high. To your point, there's somebody who's super high output in whatever domain they're in. They've done things that have like fundamentally like changed the world. They've brought new, whether it's businesses or technologies or art, works of art, entire schools of creative expression in some cases to the world. And then at a certain point, they blow themselves to smithereens, right? And they do that either through like a massive like financial scandal. They do that through a massive personal, breakdown. They do that through some sort of public expression that causes them a huge amount of problems. They say the wrong thing, maybe not once, but several hundred times, and blow themselves to smithereens. And there's this, there's this kind of arc. There's this moral arc that people kind of want to apply, which it's like the Icarus, the flying too close to the sun, and he had it coming, and he needed to keep his ego under control, and you get kind of this, this judgment that applies. So I have a different theory on this. So the term I use to describe these people, and and by the way, a lot of other people who don't actually blow themselves up but get close to it, which is a whole other set of people, I call them martyrs to civilizational progress. Right. So and we're backwards. Civilizational progress. So look, the only way civilization gets moved forward is when people like this do something new, right? Because civilization as a whole does not do new things. Right, groups of people do not do new things. Right, these things don't happen automatically. Like by default, nothing changes. The only way civilizational change on any of these axes ever happens is because one of these people stands up and says, no, I'm going to do something different than what everybody else has ever done before. So this is progress. Like this is actually how it happens. Sometimes they get lionized or rewarded. Sometimes they get crucified. Sometimes the crucifixion is literal. Sometimes it's just symbolic. But like they are those kinds of people. And then martyrs. Like when they go down in flames, like they have. And again, this is where it really screws with people's moral judgments, because everybody wants to have this sort of super clear story of like, okay, he did a bad thing and he was punished. And I'm like, no. He was the kind of person who was going to do great things and also was going to take on a level of risk and take on a level of sort of extreme behavior such that he was going to expose himself to flying too close to the sun, wings melt and crash to ground. But it's a package deal. Right. The reason you have the Picassos and the Beethovens and all these people is because they're willing to take these extreme level of risks. They are that creative and original, not just in their art or their business, but in everything else that they do, that they will set themselves up to be able to fail. A psychologist would probably, or a psychiatrist would probably say, maybe, to what extent do they actually like have a death wish? Do they actually, at some point, do they want to punish themselves? Do they want to fail? That I don't know. But you see this, they deliberately move themselves too close to the sun. And you can see it when it's happening, because like, if they get too far away from the sun, they deliberately move back towards it, right? They come right back, and they want the risk. And so anyway, like so martyrs to civilizational progress, like this is how progress happens. When these people crash and burn, the natural, inclination is to judge them morally. I tend to think we should basically say, look, like, and I don't even know if this means like giving them a moral pass or whatever, but it's like, look, like this is how civilization progresses, and we need to at least understand that there's a self-sacrificial aspect to this that may be tragic and often is tragic, but it is quite literally self-sacrificial.
Let's talk about therapy. I've been using BetterHelp for the last 3-ish months, and to make it more accessible and affordable for people, I think is.
Are there any examples of great innovators who were able to compartmentalize their risk-taking to such a degree that they had what seemed to be a morally impeccable life in every domain except in their business pursuits?
Yeah, that's right. So some people are very highly controlled like that. Some people are able to like very narrowly, and I don't really want to cite myself an example in a lot of this, but I will tell you, like, as an example, like I will never use debt in business. Number one, number two, like I have the most placid personal life you can imagine. Number three, I'm the last person in the world who's ever going to do an extreme sport. I mean, I'm not even going to go in the sauna and the ice bath. Like I'm not doing any of this. Like I don't do anything. I'm not heli skiing.
No obligation to do the ice bath.
I'm not on the Titan And I'm not going down to see the Titanic.
Thank goodness you weren't
I'm
there.
not doing any of this. I'm not doing any of this stuff. I have no interest. I don't play golf. I don't ski. I have no interest in any of this stuff, right? And so like there are, and I know people like this, right, who are very high achievers. It's just like, yeah, they're completely segmented. They're extreme risk takers in business. They're completely buttoned down on the personal side. They're completely buttoned down, financially. They're scrupulous with following every rule and law you can possibly imagine. But they're still fantastic innovators. And then I know many others who are just like their life is on fire all the time in every possible way. And whenever it looks like the fire is turning into embers, they figure out a way to like relight the fire, right? And they just really want to live on the edge. And so I think that's an independent variable. And again, I would apply the same thing. I think the same thing applies to the arts. Classical music is an example. Like I think Bach was, as an example, one of the, kind of best musicians of all time, had just a completely sedate personal life. Never had any aberrant behavior at all in his personal life. Family man, tons of kids. Apparently, pillar of the community. Right. And so like if Bach could be Bach and yet not like burn his way through, 300 mistresses or whatever, maybe you can too.
So in thinking about these two different categories of innovators, those that take on tremendous risk in all domains of their life and those that take on tremendous risk in a very compartmentalized way, I don't know what the percentages are, but I have to wonder if in this modern age of the public being far less forgivable, what I'm referring to is cancel culture. Do you think that we are limiting the number of innovations in total, like by just simply frightening or eliminating an enormous category of innovators because they don't have the confidence or the means or the strategies in place to regulate? So they're just either bowing out or they're getting crossed off, they're getting canceled one by one.
So do you think the public is less tolerant than they used to be or more tolerant?
Well, the systems that I'm not going to be careful here. I think the large institution systems are not tolerant of what the public tells them they shouldn't be tolerant of. And so if there's enough noise in the mob, I think institutions bow out. And here I'm referring not just to they essentially say, okay, they let the cancellation proceed, right. Or maybe they're the gavel that comes down, but they're not the lever that got the thing going. And so I'm not just thinking about universities, I'm also thinking about advertisers. I'm thinking about the big movie houses that cancel a film that a given actor might be in because they had something in their personal life that's still getting worked out. I'm thinking about people who are in a legal process that's not yet resolved, but the public has decided they're a bad person, et cetera.
My question is, are we really talking about the public?